Hello everyone, I'm Caitlin Teeter, and on today's Teeter Tales I'm going to be doing something a little bit different. I'm going to be giving you some tips for reading Tolkien's The Silmarillion. First, let's talk about what the Silmarillion is. The Silmarillion is chronologically before both The Hobbit and The Lord of the Rings, but I would actually recommend reading it after both of those because both The Hobbit and The Lord of the Rings serve as a better and easier entryway into Middle-earth in Tolkien's writing than Silmarillion, which sort of acts like a history book for Middle-earth and covers thousands of years. The Silmarillion also has a much less focused narrative and doesn't have a specific set of characters you're following, as it's more concerned with telling the history and the mythos of Middle-earth. This is actually a book I would not recommend to a lot of people, but I would recommend it to those who are Tolkien nerds like myself and just want to read more of his writing and more about Middle-earth, or to people who are writing a fantasy book and want to know ways they can build out their world and the mythos of their world. Though I've already touched on it, the first thing you really need to know about the Silmarillion is that it is not like The Hobbit and The Lord of the Rings. You're not going to have a typical plot structure, you're not going to have characters that you're going to be following for the whole book. It's not a novel. Really, it is more like a mythology collection for Middle-earth, as each chapter tends to jump around to different important events or tracking the life of an important figure in Middle-earth's history. Because of that, it's not a quick and easy read. It is a book that really demands your full attention because you need to keep track of a lot of names and those important events. The beginning of the book tends to be the most rough for readers because it opens with the creation story of Middle-earth. For those of you who have read Genesis in the Bible or maybe some creation stories in other mythologies, this will have a pretty similar layout. However, this means that you have godlike beings known as the Valar and later the Maiar, and not any characters that you can easily have grounding you in this story. One of the first chapters is actually called Account of the Valar and Maiar According to the Lore of the LotR, which really tells you a lot about the first few chapters, because it is a lore dump. But Tolkien does expect you to remember the lore he gives you in the beginning, which is where reading the Silmarillion gets a bit tricky. Around chapter 3 is where things start to get a little more manageable because that's when the elves come into the picture, so you start to see more of a clear narrative structure. Chapter 4 starts to introduce characters who will repeatedly pop up throughout the book and you can latch onto and recognize as important characters. This structure is kind of mirrored throughout the whole of the Silmarillion, as the first few chapters are really kind of vague and detached, but as you get thousands of years towards the present, you start to get chapters that are focused on single narratives or single characters, and you get stories like Beren and Luthien or the Children of Hurin, which I think are fantastic elements in this book and are some of the standout chapters in it. Because you have those names and information that are thrown at you right at the beginning of the book, it can be really hard to keep track of all the Valar and the Maiar, who's important, what do they do, and the book actually does provide you with a few handholds as you read it. One that I find very helpful that is found early on is the Valaquenta. I'm not sure if I'm saying that right, I'm guessing, which is the lore dump early on in the book. This is helpful because it actually gives you the different names of the Valar and what they do, including some of the important Maiar. So I found myself often flipping back to this page to look at who is who, because it breaks it down really well here. I would even recommend maybe putting a sticky note or something in this page so that you can easily flip back to it and reference it. Another thing that I found extremely helpful when reading this book is the family trees in the back of the book. There are family trees for both elves and men, and if you've read The Lord of the Rings, you might be aware that the appendices have a hobbit family tree that's more of a lore tidbit than helpful, but I would say that the family trees in the Silmarillion are almost essential for reading. They really do help you keep track of the families, who's related to who married who, which Tolkien expects you to know without actually reminding you of it in the text. So these family trees are very helpful, and I think they're well laid out. And they just make the reading experience a lot easier. The one other thing that the book provides you to give you some help in reading the book is the index of names. That sounds really intimidating, but it is actually very helpful when reading and is another page I would recommend you sticky note or mark in some way. Because essentially, it gives you all the names of the different characters throughout the book and then gives a little blurb about who they are and what they did, and maybe even who they're related to. That's super helpful when you have characters with super similar names like Fëanor, Finarfin, Fingolfin, and Finrod, and you're supposed to keep track of who each of those elves is. Some other tips I would give that aren't necessarily obvious within the book is just looking back at chapter names to remind yourself of what are the events that Tolkien thought were important to point out, or names that are particularly important to pay attention to. I often don't encourage using the internet while reading a book, but the Silmarillion is an exception to that. There are lots of helpful wikis and websites that can give you an overview of characters and events, so if you need to remind yourself of something and the index or family tree isn't helping, I would say just do a quick search online to remind yourself of who that character is. Finally, don't be afraid to take notes or talk to someone else about this book. While it sounds odd to encourage note-taking on a book you're reading for fun, I do think that this is a book that benefits from making note of events or relationships that you think are important and that you might lose track of as you're reading. The other option is talking to someone else. I know I read this book shortly after my sister did, and I was able to talk to her and discuss the characters and the events as I was reading it, which helped me keep track of everything that I was reading. A few things I would suggest you do not do while reading the Silmarillion is first, don't get bogged down in all the little names, details, and pronunciations. Originally, I tried really hard to make sure I was saying all the names right and knew the name of every single elf, but that really killed my enjoyment of the story. Just allow yourself to just keep track of the important characters and the main story beats, and that's good enough for the Silmarillion. Also, don't be embarrassed if you just aren't ready to read the book. When I first tried to read the Silmarillion, it was in the middle of a busy college semester, and I had to put the book down and wait until I could have more time to devote to it. It's okay to say you're not ready to read the book or in the right place to read it, or even to just say it's not your cup of tea. This book is definitely not for everyone. Finally, try to have fun with the book. Trying to force yourself to read it can make it a chore and make it a slow slog to get through. It wasn't until I really let myself have fun with butchering the names and the pronunciations or joke about how crazy the elves are in this book that I really started to enjoy it and appreciate it for what it is. I hope some of these tips were helpful for you and that they make it easier for you to read the Silmarillion and approach it. If you want to ask questions about the book or any other tips I have for reading it, go ahead and comment and I'll do my best to answer. Bye!